Well, how could everyone just go, you know, that Raman really has some great qualities. She did absolutely nothing, terrible in the debate, but she gets a last-minute surge past, as the, by the way, there's not ranked choice voting, as the number one seed to be the pick over Bass, and as she surges past Pratt. It's insane, along with the qualifications for mail-in voting. Do you know that if you don't have a driver's license, you can use an employer ID card? Really?
There are a lot of people who look at this and say there is no fraud. Okay? I don't think that they're right either when you have a situation where you don't have voter ID.
The process for class president at most schools is more secure than what they're doing right now. And you find out the same day. So the fact that they're mailing ballots to everyone that's registered and then just, oh, okay.
So people can just dig through garbage cans, find ballots, and send them in, apparently forever after an election is over. It's not okay. It's got to come to an end, and people need to go to jail.
That was just a tiny taste of the right-wing shitstorm that ensued after Nithya Raman overtook Spencer Pratt in LA's mayoral race. You heard exasperated Fox News hosts suggest that it was scandalous to allow alternate forms of ID and have ballots mailed to all registered voters, but that's kind of how it's supposed to work. They're trying to make voting less tedious to encourage people to vote. That's how democracies are supposed to function. But my favorite claim came from Republican Randy Fine, who said that people in California were dumpster diving for ballots because, of course, if you're going to rig an election, it makes the most sense to physically go dumpster diving in search of ballots that have already been filled out, as opposed to, say, just printing off a bunch of fake ballots or changing the number in the system. Like, it's nonsensical on its face. And I've already put more thought into this claim than he did, because these people don't think. Like, these are Republicans who just say things without ever thinking them through, ever wondering whether or not they should vocalize the dumb thoughts that are going through their brains, assuming they have internal monologues in the first place. Like, their disappointment is enough for them to conclude that the election was, in fact, rigged. And it seems like the LA race is turning into the new 2020. Elon Musk amplified multiple false claims of election fraud on Twitter to his millions of followers because, of course, closeted homosexual Benny Johnson claimed that it defies all mathematical probability to see a Republican fall to third place in a city that overwhelmingly leans Democrats. Just hilarious. Clay Travis echoed Johnson's sentiment, arguing no one with a functioning brain believes these results. And washed-up actor Kevin Sorbo tweeted, "They're stealing the election in front of our eyes. What will be done about it?" Of course, Donald Trump also argued on Truth Social that it was not possible for Spencer Pratt to have lost the LA runoffs after the big lead he had. Third world nation, rigged elections. Now they'll be working on great guy Steve Hilton, because apparently they can only rig one election at a time. And of course, Trump was one of the first idiots beating this drum, writing on Truth Social the day after the election that there was big cheating by the Democrats in California. And in case you missed it, he threw a conniption fit during an interview about this, which culminated in him storming off like the petulant child that he is.
The election was rigged. It was a dirty election. And it's happening again right now in California.
Presented evidence.
It's happening right now in California. Right now, it's look at what's happening in California.
To that?
It's
the
4
Republicans
days.
are doing well in
California. It's no, they're not. They're dropping fast because it's a rigged election. Let me tell you, it's 4 days. And they aren't even close to coming up with it.
That's how they count.
You know why they're doing that? Because they're cheating on the election.
Do you have evidence to support that?
All I have to do is look. All I have to do is look.
That's not evidence.
And I listen to people, and let's see what happens.
But, sir, that's not evidence.
Do you think it's appropriate?
That's how they count the votes in California.
Do you think it's appropriate that they have an election, and 5 days later they're nowhere close to picking a winner?
State and local officials acknowledge they are slow. They're urging.
No, they're crooked.
They're urging the votes to be counted quickly. That's how they vote in California.
They're crooked, just like you're crooked. Your press is crooked, and Meet the Press is crooked.
To be fair, I'm not crooked, but let's
Really?
Let's
well,
continue.
You play right into their hands.
Let's continue.
You're either crooked or you're stupid. You play right into their hands with this rap. You know that these elections are rigged. Your network knows that they're rigged. You know that I won an election in a landslide, and I got 94% bad press.
But, Mr. President,
you know why I
you've
got
never
that?
presented
Because you have no
evidence.
credibility.
But you've never presented evidence that it was rigged. Let's keep talking about, I want to talk about Todd
You
Blanche.
have more evidence. There's more evidence than ever presented.
Let's talk
Your
about...
elections
You
in
went
this
to
country,
court.
we're like a third world country.
But, sir-
Your elections are crooked, and you're crooked, and Meet the Press is crooked,
Mr.
and so
President-
is ABC, and CBS, and CNN.
But, Mr. President-
You're one-sided, crooked networks. All right, let's call it quits, because I've had enough. Thank you, darling. Have a good time.
Mr. President, let's please. I traveled all the way to Wisconsin.
I've sat in the rain with you.
I know. I
I've sat in the
traveled
rain
all the
with
way
you
to
for an hour,
Wisconsin.
on and off in the rain, and I've given you enough time. You ought to straighten out your press, because you know what?
Mr.
A
President,
country can never be
We
great
traveled
with a dishonest
Listen,
press.
we
Come on, let's
traveled
go.
all the way to Wisconsin for this interview.
I applaud these reporters for their restraint. I really do, because if he talked to me like that, it would take everything in me to not just fly off the handle and go off on him. And he does this mostly with female journalists. You notice that? Like, he doesn't treat anyone with respect, but he especially degrades women and calls them names. And one of these days, I would love to see them just fucking clap back at him. Fuck you, Mr. President. You know what? Fuck you. You geriatric diaper-wearing cunt. You don't get to talk to people like that just because you're the fucking president. Get out of here. I'm kicking you out, bitch. Give me your microphone. Like, it's just, that's not acceptable. But, you know, putting that aside, with regard to his claim, every single election that doesn't go his way is automatically rigged. You know, it's not that Trump has repeatedly told Republican voters to not trust mail-in voting, meaning that Republicans are going to vote in person and then their votes are going to be counted first, and then the Democrats who mostly vote by mail, their votes are going to be counted second. It's that the election was rigged because it didn't turn out the way that he wanted it to. Even though it's a minor miracle that Spencer Pratt got as many votes as he did, given how blue the city he's running in is. But this is what we all have to deal with now because of Donald Trump, the first president in American history to ever deny the results of an election. Him lying about elections is a price that we all have to pay because our lawmakers decided for all of us to not hold him accountable, even though he incited an insurrection. Had just 3 more senators voted guilty at his second impeachment trial, he wouldn't have been able to run again, and the nightmare as we know it would already have been over. But since that didn't happen, we're going to have to deal with his lies for the foreseeable future, the lies of somebody who refuses to accept results of elections that he does not like. And what makes it especially aggravating is that they're crying foul even though they have a baked-in institutional advantage in the first place. Think about this. Trump was able to take office in 2016 even though he got less votes than Hillary Clinton, because we have a racist electoral college that doesn't just make the person who has the most votes win, like every other democracy. To add insult to injury, the Supreme Court just gutted Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act at his behest, and southern states are gerrymandering black voters out of existence as we speak, and he's still mad. When blue states like Virginia responded by disenfranchising Republicans, their state Supreme Court struck that down even though voters approved of those maps. When Republicans do it, it's A-OK. But it's so much worse than that because our entire system, it favors Republicans at the institutional level. The Senate as an institution is designed to give rural Republican-leaning voters more of a say than the rest of the country. But that's not enough for him. They're making sure that they have the same advantage in the House now, too, as they did in the Senate. Because if they don't win every single election, then the system isn't fair, according to the party that has a lopsided advantage across the entire fucking country. It is infuriating to me. If anyone should be pissed off about the unfairness of elections, it should be us. They're the ones rigging elections through voter suppression, through illegal voter roll purges. Because, like, what do you call it when red states limit the number of voting stations in majority-minority precincts? Is that not rigging? What do you call it when states like Texas remove eligible voters from the rolls illegally? Is that not rigging? What do you call it when red states make voters jump through hoops just to register to vote and require specific forms of ID that are expensive and difficult to obtain? That's not rigging? No, because it's only rigging when Republicans lose elections, because that's the standard that Donald Trump set. And it doesn't help that news anchors entertain these false claims of fraud just for the sake of neutrality. For example, the CNBC clip that you saw at the beginning of this video featured a host that wanted to make it seem like he was challenging the person who was spewing this bullshit, but like, listen to the limp-dicked way he set up the question. Just get a load of this shit.
There may be fraud, there may not be fraud in our election system to some degree, one way or the other. I think as Becky pointed out, obviously the law is the law in California. could have a big debate about whether to change the law. But do you think that it helps, given where you sit in the world, to speculate about fraud or potential fraud without any direct evidence of said fraud?
That is disqualifying for a journalist. It doesn't matter that he asked for evidence. The fact that he said there may be fraud is a win for the person that he was supposed to be challenging, because there's not fraud. Isolated instances of fraud are statistically insignificant, and the perpetrators are prosecuted. The scale of fraud that Republicans are alleging here is completely bullshit. And everybody needs to say that definitively and authoritatively, because if they don't, you allow Republicans to change people's perceptions of reality. Just think about how they've gotten people to believe straight up lies by repeating them again and again and again. Republicans always say confidently and unequivocally that Democrats are winning elections because they're cheating by importing immigrants into the country, and those illegal votes are always pushing them above the edge whenever they win. You know, if a Republican wins, then they're not cheating. If a Democrat wins, then they're cheating. But do you want to guess what the actual percentage of undocumented people voting in America is? Just take a guess. Based on how Republicans talk about this, you would expect it to be like millions of undocumented people at least, maybe a plurality of voters based on the way they talk about this. But when the Heritage Foundation crunched the numbers, they found out that that was not actually the case. Surprise, surprise. The American Immigration Council explains that there's been just 68 total cases of voter fraud committed by undocumented immigrants in the last 40 fucking years, meaning illegal votes cast by undocumented people account for just 0.0001% of the entire fucking population. In other words, it's a non-issue. It doesn't happen enough to change the outcome of elections, and when it does happen, people are caught and prosecuted. But according to Republicans, this is part of how Democrats keep winning. They win by cheating. They let undocumented people vote illegally, and that's how they win. That is, of course, when they're not dumpster diving for ballots. I mean, we can't allow them to just make shit up without consequences, because society cannot survive if a portion of the population only has a tenuous connection to reality at best. And what makes LA in particular especially idiotic with regard to their fraud claims is that Spencer Pratt losing is actually a worst-case scenario for the Democrats who are supposedly rigging the election, and CNN's Harry Enten debunked this myth with the disdain that it deserved.
This is the dumbest conspiracy theory I have ever heard, because the Democratic establishment and Karen Bass wanted Spencer Pratt in the runoff. They don't want any part to do with Nithya Raman. Why is that? Because just take a look here. Okay, Mayor runoff polls, Bass versus opponent versus Pratt. Bass would have crushed Pratt by 18 points. That's what the polling showed. Look at how she does against Nithya Raman, on the other hand. Raman is ahead by 4 points. Bass has a real race on her hand if, in fact, Raman is the one who advances. And, of course, the Democratic establishment is backing Karen Bass. But versus Spencer Pratt, she was crushing him. She wanted to face Pratt. She wanted nothing to do with Raman. That's why these conspiracy theories, simply put, make no sense, people. Raman is actually decently liked by LA City voters. Look at this. Okay, Nithya Raman, +5 on the net favorability rating. Karen Bass, way underwater at -22 points. You basically just need someone who's half decently well-liked to be favored, or at least have a real shot against the incumbent Karen Bass. Spencer Pratt, on the other hand, look at that. He's even less liked than Karen Bass. He's 32 points underwater. Karen Bass doesn't want to face Nithya Raman. She would love to face Spencer Pratt, because simply put, she's managed to find someone who's more unpopular than she is, and she's quite unpopular. This is the other thing. The President of the United States is such a drain on Spencer Pratt. I mean, hello, okay, Los Angeles City voters, Trump's net approval rating in the city of Los Angeles is about 55 points underwater. I mean, the idea that a Republican could be the mayor of New York when the President of the United States has a net approval rating, it's so difficult. 55 points underwater, and then registered as Republican, just 15% of the voters in the city of Los Angeles are registered as Republican. 55% are Democrats. Spencer Pratt was facing a mountain in order to win, and so Karen Bass and the Democratic establishment knew that there's basically no chance a Republican could be the next mayor of New York. The only way she could lose is if she goes up against another Democrat.
Yeah, and here we are. But in the minds of Republicans, there's no difference between establishment Democrats and progressive Democrats. They're one and the same to them. So they're not savvy enough to discern the difference, and they're sure as shit not smart enough to even consider why an establishment Democrat would prefer to go up against a Republican in a deep blue city. Because even by their logic, wouldn't it be easier to rig it against the Republican who's going to get less votes in LA? It makes no sense. Not to mention, if Steve Hilton advances, which it looks like he will, are they not going to reconcile that Democrats only rigged it against Spencer Pratt? Is he really that important? Did they just forget to rig it against Steve Hilton? And at the time that I record this, only 83% of votes have been counted. So Spencer Pratt could theoretically still win, but if he advances, will they apologize for their false claims of fraud? Of course not. They'll just claim that Democrats had to unrig it because they got caught rigging it or some shit like that, because these people are intellectually deficient and dishonest. So never, ever expect them to admit that they were wrong about anything. To them, it's always about their feelings. And since Karen Bass is deeply unpopular, it feels reasonable to expect the Republican to win, but they fundamentally misunderstand voters in these blue districts. They're not unpopular. Democrats aren't unpopular because they're too progressive like they think. They're unpopular usually because they're not progressive enough. I live in Oregon, and the same thing is kind of happening here. Year after year, our state Democratic Party gets more and more unpopular, and I don't even think I've met a Democrat in Oregon who approves of our state Democratic Party. But that doesn't mean that we're going to vote for Republicans, because that wouldn't make sense. Everything we dislike about corporate Democrats is compounded with the Republican alternative. Oregon's Governor Tina Kotek, for example, is a neoliberal corporate Democrat who's selling us out to the highest bidder, yet Oregon Republicans are accusing her of not being business-friendly enough, which is absurd. So if we dislike her because of her neoliberal corporatism, why would we then opt for a Republican who is offering even more neoliberal corporatism? They're offering neoliberal corporatism on steroids. It makes no sense. It's like saying, I'm really mad that this 4-piece chicken strip meal that I ordered was so unfilling. I'm still hungry. So next time, I'm going to get the 2-piece instead, just to show how mad I am at the fucking 4-piece. I mean, not the best example, but you get the point. It makes no sense for us to vote for the worst option because we're dissatisfied with the Democrat. And maybe Republicans would understand this, understand the differences between Democratic voters, if they took the time to understand why some Democrats are so unpopular in deep blue cities and didn't just call like all of us communists and socialists and extremists. But I will grant them that it is frustrating that it takes California so long to count the votes. I wish that they did this faster. I mean, there's not much they can do about ballots postmarked for election day that haven't come in yet, but I mean, there's no reason why it should take this long to finish counting the votes, especially considering that other states, even though they're less populous, they have mail-in voting and they get this done faster. But the reason why it takes so long in California, one, is because there's a lack of resources, and two, because they're taking their time to make sure that there isn't any voter fraud, to give Republicans the confidence that they want in American elections. The New York Times explains California relies heavily on mail balloting, which slows the tally because of the work involved to check signatures, open envelopes, and inspect ballots before counting them. The state's leaders take pride in a deliberate process meant to make voting easy while keeping elections secure. And when voters wait until the final days to submit or send their ballots, as was the case this year, they deluge elections officials with envelopes that must be handled with care. Different county offices work on different schedules depending on their staffing or labor agreements. Only a fraction of the 58 counties updated vote totals this past weekend. Most offices lack the resources to keep staff members on constant rotation. In California, each of those counties decides how much to spend on election operations, creating major differences in their capacity to count ballots, said Ben Gibbs, who works on state voting policy for Protect Democracy. So while I understand the frustration in wanting to know who won as quickly as possible, it's a logistical issue. It's an issue that Californian politicians should address. I agree with you. But to suggest that it's slow because they're rigging it doesn't make any sense. It's idiotic because if they're rigging it, they would put the results out as quickly as possible since they're just making them up, right? It's taking longer because this is a very large state and they're trying to make it secure to ensure confidence in Republicans who now think every election is stolen, that it is indeed not stolen. Like, do Republicans think they're like making it slow on purpose? They're sadistically counting as slowly as possible to antagonize them. Haha, we're stealing it and you can't do anything about it. I mean, it's crazy. Like, they talk about how, all of a sudden the number jumped up. But a voter dump to Republicans is literally just counties reporting their most recent tallies. That's it. But to them, it's a conspiracy. But I mean, it doesn't really matter what you say, and explaining it does nothing because these people aren't driven by facts. They're driven purely by their emotions, like the toddlers that they are. But even though it feels pointless to fact check them, I still think it is necessary because if we don't challenge their bullshit, we're just letting them drag the rest of the country into an alternate reality that they're living in, and we shouldn't allow them to do that. So they can throw their tantrums if they want to. That's fine, but they're not going to get away with blatant lies. We have to check their lies because the second we let their bullshit go unchallenged, they win.
Mike is a total shitlib. Once he started shilling for the DNC, I stopped watching. So I definitely won't be hitting the subscribe button or turning on notifications by clicking the bell. No way. It's very sad, I know.